During my daughter Kim's wedding dinner, I received an anonymous message. "Leave now. Don't talk to anyone." For a moment I thought it was some kind of joke. But who would send me a secret warning like that? What I discovered about my own family will shock you. I'm going to tell you everything, but first make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And tell me where you're listening to this story from. I'd love to know how far we're reaching. My name is Howard Prescott. I'm 67 years old, and my whole life has been built around honest work and solid principles. In Charleston, I'm known as the diner guy. 3 establishments I've opened over 4 decades, serving strong coffee and home cooking to folks who value the basics done right. After my wife Becky died a few years ago, work became my refuge and my strongest identity. I've always believed that when you treat people right, with respect and honesty, they do the same for you. That moral justice was my compass in life, until I discovered it doesn't always work when it comes to family. Have you ever been there, trusting too much in the goodness of those closest to you? Kim and I went 2 years without speaking after a disagreement that started simple and became something much bigger than both of us. She wanted something important from me, something that involved decades of my work. And when I refused, the conversation heated up in a way I never imagined. The words she said that day still hurt when I remember them, but I thought that with time things would naturally work out. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with hurt and wounded pride on both sides. Family always finds a way to reconcile, right? At least that's what I always believed until then. I've always believed that family is a safe harbor, even when it fails, even when it disappoints, even when it hurts deeply. This conviction came from my childhood in rural South Carolina, where neighbors were practically relatives and relatives were sacred. My parents taught me that blood is blood, that you can fight, you can drift apart for a while, but in the end, you always find your way back. During those 2 whole years of silence, I clung to this belief like it was a life preserver in the middle of the ocean. Because without it, without that certainty, what else was left of the life I'd built with so much care? The wedding invitation arrived on an ordinary afternoon, inside an elegant and expensive envelope, with my name written by hand in beautiful script. For a few long seconds, I just stared at that thick paper, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: pure and simple hope. Kim had invited me to the most important day of her life, and that had to mean something special. Maybe she was also tired of this silly distance. Maybe she wanted to rebuild our relationship like before. The invitation rekindled in me the real expectation that things could return to what they were in the good times. I decided to go to the wedding, thinking about what Becky always said about new beginnings, that they're like sunrise. They come slowly but illuminate everything when they finally appear on the horizon. She had that simple and profound wisdom that I always admired, and even after years since her passing, I still heard her voice guiding me in the most difficult moments. I bought a new suit, chose a special gift that I knew Kim would like, and mentally prepared myself to extend my hand first if necessary. But was I being too naive about this whole thing? You know when you have that strange feeling that something doesn't add up? First, she showed up in my office behind the main diner with a proposal that sounded too good to be true. Kim wanted me to invest a considerable amount in a unique opportunity that Scott, her boyfriend at the time, had discovered in the financial market. She spoke enthusiastically about guaranteed returns and how it would be our chance to multiply the family's wealth. When I asked for specific details, she deflected, saying I didn't need to understand the technical aspects, just trust them. But something about her rush, the way she avoided my gaze, made me uncomfortable. You know when you feel like you're being sold to, not consulted? After a few weeks, the conversation evolved into something much more serious and frightening than I had imagined. She wanted me to sell 2 of the 3 diners and put all that money under Scott's financial management. She talked about investment diversification, about how risky it was to keep everything in antiquated businesses like my establishments. The way she said antiquated hurt more than she probably imagined. Those diners were my entire life, my legacy. When I questioned about guarantees and contracts, she got irritated, saying that family doesn't need paperwork. This family betrayal started very subtly, disguised as concern for my financial future. Then came the blow that really made me see the whole situation with painful clarity. During a more heated discussion about the subject, Kim said I was too old to make intelligent financial decisions alone. that people my age needed guidance from younger people, more connected to the modern world. The words came out of her mouth with a coldness I had never seen before. It was as if she were talking to a stranger, not to the father who worked his whole life to provide stability for her. At that moment, I understood it wasn't about money. It was about control, about turning me into someone dependent. The final conversation turned into an ugly fight, with accusations on both sides and words that shouldn't have been said. She called me stubborn, outdated, said I was wasting opportunities out of pure pride and ignorance. I responded that I wasn't going to hand over a lifetime's work to risky experiments by people I barely knew. When I made it clear that my answer was no, definitely no, she completely lost her composure. She screamed that I was being selfish, that I wasn't thinking about her future, that I preferred being a penny pincher to seeing the family prosper. It was the last time we spoke face to face for 2 whole years. The silence that settled afterward was total and devastating for both sides, I'm sure. Kim blocked me on her phone, on social media, cut off any form of communication as if I had died. The few mutual friends avoided talking about her in front of me, and I made sure not to ask. For months I waited for her to call, to send a message, to take the first step toward reconciliation. But the phone never rang, the messages never came, and gradually I accepted that I had lost my only daughter. Until the day that elegant invitation appeared in my mailbox, changing everything again. The event hall in Charleston was impeccable that night, with elegant decoration that screamed money spent on every detail. Imported flowers, crystal chandeliers, tables set with fine china. It was the kind of party Kim had always dreamed of having. I arrived punctually wearing my new suit, carrying the gift I had chosen with care, and a silent expectation that that night would mark a new beginning. The guests greeted me with polite smiles, but I noticed something in the looks, conversations that stopped when I approached, rehearsed hugs and broad smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Did everyone know something I didn't? During cocktail hour, some relatives and family friends approached to chat, but the questions were strange and too specific. They wanted to know about my retirement plans, if I had thought about selling the diners, if I had made a will recently. They asked about my health, if I was feeling well at my age, if it wasn't getting too heavy managing 3 establishments alone. Their curiosity about inheritance and succession was almost palpable, disguised as genuine concern. When someone directly asked if I had thought about Kim's financial future, I understood these weren't casual questions. It was as if everyone was following a script, probing ground for something bigger. I responded to all these approaches with polite vagueness without giving concrete information about my financial situation. I said I was in good health, that business was going well, that I wasn't in a hurry to retire. I maintained a polite smile while deflecting more invasive questions about values, bank accounts, and assets. But inside, a strange sensation was growing, as if I were prey being surrounded by predators. Their insistence on matters that were nobody's business made me increasingly uncomfortable. Why such sudden curiosity about my financial life, precisely at my daughter's wedding? It was during dinner that my phone first vibrated with a message from an unknown number. I looked discreetly at the screen, perhaps expecting a congratulations message or something like that. Instead, I read a phrase that chilled my blood and made my heart race. Leave now. Don't talk to the bride. For a few seconds I stared at those words, trying to process what they meant and who could have sent them. Was it some kind of bad joke? Someone with mental problems? Or was there something real and dangerous happening there? Next, while I was still trying to understand the first message, a second one arrived that made everything even more confusing and frightening. Don't drink anything, I'll explain. This time, my hands trembled slightly as I held the phone, and I looked around the hall with completely different eyes. Who was sending me those warnings? Why couldn't I drink anything? What the hell was happening at my own daughter's wedding party? The conspiracy against the elderly that I never imagined existed was revealing itself through anonymous messages from someone who seemed to know something very serious. That's when everything changed forever. I moved away from the main table as if I were going to take an important call, trying to maintain naturalness in my walk and expression. I walked to a more reserved area of the hall, near the restrooms, where the noise from the party was more muffled. My heart was beating fast, but I knew I needed to stay calm so as not to draw attention from other guests. I looked around to make sure no one was watching me, took a deep breath and waited a few seconds. The phone vibrated again, and this time it was a call from the same unknown number that had sent the messages. With a slightly trembling hand, I answered and put the device to my ear. The voice on the other side was feminine, low, and clearly tense, as if the person were speaking hidden from someone. "Mr. Prescott, I'm Megan, an employee of the event hall coordination, and I'm risking my job by calling you." She spoke quickly, nervously, but with determination in her voice that impressed me with her courage. "I'm monitoring the security cameras and listening to conversations through the internal audio system we use to coordinate the event." I stopped breathing for a few seconds, trying to process what she was telling me. "What did you hear?" I asked, already fearing the answer that would come, but needing to know the truth. Megan said she had heard through the camera microphones a conversation between Kim and Scott backstage at the event. They had a specific and detailed plan to offer me a prepared drink at a strategic moment of the party, when everyone was more relaxed. "The idea is for you to get confused, somewhat disoriented, and then they'll appear with important documents for you to sign." The coldness with which she described the scheme made me feel nauseous, as if the ground were collapsing beneath my feet. It was impossible to believe that my own daughter was capable of something so low and cowardly. But there I was, receiving an alert about how a vulnerable elderly person like me would be manipulated by my own family. Their plan was to wait until I was visibly confused and unable to think straight, then appear with the documents. "There's power of attorney, property transfers of the diners, even authorization to move your bank accounts," she continued, her voice getting even lower and more urgent. "Mr. Prescott, they have everything ready. They're just waiting for the right moment to execute." I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and disbelief that almost made me drop the phone to the floor. How could my own daughter, my own blood, plan something so cruel and calculating? "Where are these papers?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the emotional earthquake happening inside me. She said she had seen Scott organizing the documents in a small room next to the main hall, normally used to store decoration materials. "I can send a photo to your phone right now so you can see I'm telling the truth and it's not paranoia." In a few seconds, my phone received an image that confirmed everything she had said with frightening details. It was a table with various organized papers, and I could clearly see my name on power of attorney forms and transfers already filled out. "The papers are in the service room, dark wooden door at the end of the corridor to the right." My mind processed the information while part of me still refused to believe what I was seeing. The photo showed not just documents but specific values, signatures already rehearsed, even drafts of how to approach the situation with me. There were notes about the right timing, about how long the substance would take to take effect, about witnesses who could validate my spontaneous decision to sign. It was meticulous and cold planning that revealed how much time they had dedicated to this betrayal. I felt my stomach turn when I realized that while I was buying a new suit and choosing a wedding gift, they were calculating how to rob me. It was like discovering that your own family had become a criminal organization with you as the main target. I quickly thanked Megan and hung up the phone, knowing I needed to act fast before they noticed my absence. I discreetly went to the room she had indicated, walking naturally as if I were going to the bathroom. The door was ajar, and when I entered I found exactly what she had described, and much more. A table with an open folder, full of documents with my name, my signature forged on some drafts, exact values of the diners already calculated. There was even an operation timeline, with specific times marked for each stage of the plan. It was surreal to be there, documenting the very betrayal my daughter had orchestrated against me. I photographed everything with my phone, every page, every detail, every note that could serve as legal evidence. My hand was shaking while I took the photos, but I knew I needed concrete and indisputable proof. I documented the values, the false signatures, the timeline, even the bottles and glasses that were separated on a tray. It was a complete operation, with backup plans and alternative strategies in case something went wrong. After photographing absolutely everything, I organized the papers exactly as they were and left the room, being careful to leave the door in the same position I found it. I returned to the corridor discreetly, checking if anyone had noticed my absence, and immediately called the police. I quickly explained the situation and asked for specific instructions on what to do. The operator told me to remain at the location without consuming anything. "Maintain normalcy, Mr. Prescott, but don't drink absolutely anything they give you." the officer instructed firmly. We need to catch them in the act to have a solid accusation of attempted poisoning and fraud. It was hard to believe I was talking to the police about my own daughter. The officer explained that a patrol car was already on its way and that they needed me to remain at the location to arrest those involved red-handed. If you leave now, they might destroy the evidence and claim it was all a misunderstanding, he explained. Act normally, but be alert to any attempt to offer you drink or food. It was an absurd and painful situation. I was at a wedding party, but it was actually a police operation in progress. My daughter was celebrating her wedding while planning to rob me, and I was collaborating with the police to arrest her. What father in the world expects to live through such a devastating situation? I took several deep breaths, trying to organize my thoughts and prepare myself emotionally for the most difficult minutes of my life. I knew that soon I would see my only daughter being publicly exposed for something so low and criminal. But there was no choice left. She had crossed a line that couldn't be ignored, forgiven, or forgotten. I put the phone in my pocket, adjusted my jacket, checked if my expression looked natural, and prepared to return to the party. The hard part would be maintaining naturalness, knowing that at any moment someone would try to drug me. It was like being in a suspense movie, but unfortunately it was my real life unfolding in the most painful way possible. I would stay at the party and wait for them to make the first move, knowing that every movement was being watched by the police. The evidence was documented, the plan was discovered, and now it was a matter of time until the truth exploded publicly. I returned to the main hall with firm steps, but with a heavy heart of sadness and disappointment. Kim smiled at me from afar, waving as if she were the most caring daughter in the world, and for a moment I wondered if there was any chance I was wrong. But the photos on my phone and Megan's nervous voice reminded me that there was no mistake at all. My daughter really had planned to betray me in the most cowardly way possible, and now I was ready to face the consequences of this devastating discovery. I decided to return to the hall with forced naturalness, knowing I needed to keep Kim and Scott at the location until the police arrived. I walked back to the main table, trying to control the nervousness and anxiety growing inside me with each step. My heart was beating fast, but I knew I couldn't show that I had discovered their plan. It was like playing the most difficult role of my life, being the naive and trusting father while knowing my daughter was about to betray me. I took a deep breath and forced a smile as I approached the family. Could they sense any change in my behavior? Megan's confidential warning had changed everything for me. Kim received me with a radiant smile and a champagne glass in her hand, approaching me with all the false sweetness in the world. "Dad, where were you? I was looking for you to make a special toast," she said, extending the golden flute in my direction. "To the most important father in my life, the man who has always been by my side," she continued, with words that sounded beautiful but that I now knew were completely false. I looked at that glass and felt a chill down my spine, knowing exactly what was in there. It was surreal to be receiving poison from my own daughter's hands, disguised as affection and recognition. How could she lie so naturally? I held the glass carefully, feigning emotion and gratitude for the tribute she was making. "Thank you, daughter. These words mean a lot to me," I replied, trying to sound genuinely touched by the situation. Inside, a mixture of disgust and sadness took over every fiber of my being. I raised the glass as if to toast, but obviously didn't bring it to my lips. I just pretended to take a small sip. Clink. The sound of my wedding ring hitting the crystal of the flute was audible when I faked the movement. It was difficult to maintain the performance when all I wanted was to confront her right there. But I knew I needed to follow the police instructions and wait for the right moment. Scott appeared beside us shortly after, with that fake smile that I now saw with total clarity. "Howard, great to see you enjoying the party. Kim was anxious for you two to reconnect after so long," he said, putting his hand on my shoulder fraternally. He tried to keep the mood light and relaxed, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes, the way he discreetly looked at the glass in my hand. "We hope you two can rebuild this important family relationship," he continued, feigning genuine concern. It was revolting to see how they played the roles of loving family when they were actually executing a criminal plan. What kind of people can do this without showing remorse? I continued the conversation normally, praising the decoration, asking about the honeymoon, talking about how proud I was of Kim's professional success. But inside, my mind was completely focused on not bringing that glass to my lips under any circumstances. Discreetly, whenever possible, I would place the flute on some table or hold it without actually drinking. They didn't seem to suspect anything, but I noticed that both kept an eye on me, waiting for the moment when the substance would take effect. It was a Kafkaesque situation, being at a party with people who wanted to harm me, pretending everything was normal. Outside, I knew the police were already positioning themselves discreetly. The minutes passed slowly, and I began to wonder how much longer I could maintain that performance. Kim and Scott made sure to stay close, starting conversations, involving me in talk so I couldn't get away. "Dad, you seem a little tense. Are you feeling okay?" Kim asked with false concern, touching my arm. "Maybe you should drink some more water, or perhaps finish your champagne," Scott suggested, pointing to my still full flute. It was obvious they were getting anxious about the delay and the drug's effect. I replied that everything was fine, that it was just emotion from the reconciliation. But could I keep up the charade much longer? It was then that I heard the discreet sound of the main door opening, followed by firm and organized footsteps. I turned my head slightly and saw two uniformed police officers entering the hall with professional discretion. My heart accelerated even more, but this time with relief. Finally, the moment of truth had arrived. The guests began to notice the police presence, with low whispers and curious looks spreading throughout the environment. Kim and Scott still hadn't noticed. They continued focused on me, waiting for signs that the substance was taking effect. "Dad, are you sure you're feeling okay? You seem a bit confused," Kim insisted, clearly worried about the delay in their schedule. "You know when you feel that justice is finally coming?" The sound of more approaching footsteps made Scott finally look toward the main entrance. His face completely changed expression when he saw the police officers heading in our direction with determination. "What's happening here?" he murmured, trying to stay calm but obviously panicking. Kim also turned and went pale, seeing the situation unfolding. The guests around us began to step away, creating an open circle around us. The music decreased in volume and a palpable tension took over the entire hall. It was as if time had slowed down, and I knew that in a few seconds everything would be revealed publicly. I remained seated in my chair, watching everything unfold with a mixture of sadness and determination. I knew the next few minutes would be devastating for Kim, but she had chosen this path alone. The champagne remained untouched in my hand, physical evidence of what they tried to do to me. I took a deep breath, preparing myself emotionally for the confrontation that was about to happen. It was the end of a family relationship, but also the beginning of the justice I deserved. I looked around the elegant hall, thinking about how that night that should have been a celebration was transforming into the public exposure of a betrayal. Murmurs began to spread among the guests. The police officers stopped a few meters from our table, and one of them spoke in a clear and professional voice. "Good evening. We need to speak with Mrs. Kim Anderson and Mr. Scott Anderson." The silence in the hall became absolute, with all guests paying attention to the situation unfolding. Kim tried to maintain composure, but her voice trembled when she asked, "What happened, officer? Is there a problem?" Scott became visibly nervous, running his hand through his hair and looking around as if searching for an exit. It was obvious that both knew exactly why the police were there. The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no more escaping the consequences. "Have you ever seen someone realize they've been caught red-handed?" I knew the moment of total revelation had finally arrived, and I prepared myself for what would probably be the most difficult confrontation of my life. Justice was about to be done, but the emotional price would be devastating for everyone involved. I stayed firm in my chair, knowing I had made the right choice by not drinking from that glass. In a few moments, the whole truth about the conspiracy would come to light, and my daughter would have to face the consequences of her actions. It was sad, but necessary. Some betrayals simply cannot be forgiven or ignored. The echo of police footsteps echoed through the hall in absolute silence. One of the officers announced in a firm and clear voice that cut through the hall's silence like a blade. "We received a formal complaint with evidence of attempted fraud and possible poisoning." The guests' murmur intensified, with people looking at each other and whispering questions about what was happening. I rose from my chair with calm and dignity, holding my phone in my hand. "Officer, I am Howard Prescott, and I was the one who made the complaint," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. The expression of shock on Kim's face was something I'll never forget, as if she had seen a ghost. Scott went pale as paper, His hands began to tremble visibly. It was the moment of just retribution I had been waiting for. I showed the photos of the documents I had photographed in the service room on my phone, handing the device to the officer to examine. "These are the evidence I collected just minutes ago, officer. Documents prepared with my forged signature and transfers of my assets," I explained with a firm voice. The nearest guests could see the images on the screen, and the reaction of surprise and indignation was visible on their faces. "There's power of attorney, property transfers, authorization to move bank accounts, everything already filled out," I continued, while the officer analyzed each photo. Kim tried to approach, babbling something about a misunderstanding, but the official asked her to remain where she was. The circle of guests around us grew, everyone wanting to understand what was happening. You know that moment when the truth finally comes to light publicly? I discreetly pointed to the room next to the main hall, where the documents were stored. "The original papers are in the service room, exactly as I photographed," I informed the officer. One of the agents immediately went to the indicated location and brought back the folder with all the documents. The sound of the folder being opened echoed through the silent hall, while the officer removed the papers one by one. It was surreal to see my own betrayal being exposed publicly this way, but at the same time I felt immense relief. The guests craned their necks trying to see the documents, some taking photos discreetly with their phones. The atmosphere in the hall had completely changed, from elegant party to crime scene in a matter of minutes. The document pages matched perfectly with the images on my phone, confirming every detail I had photographed. My name was on false power of attorney forms, signatures rehearsed in drafts, exact values of my diners already calculated for transfer. There was even a detailed timeline of the operation, with specific times for each stage of the criminal plan. "Officer, here's proof of how they planned everything down to the smallest detail," I said, pointing to the documents. The officer confirmed that the evidence was consistent and sufficient for the accusations. Kim looked at the papers as if she wanted them to magically disappear. Scott tried to move away discreetly, but another officer kept him at the location. It was impossible to deny or explain such detailed and incriminating documents. I raised the intact champagne glass I was still holding in my hand, showing it for everyone to see. "And this is the drink they tried to make me consume, officer. I didn't drink a single drop," I declared loudly. The officer immediately took the glass carefully and sealed it in a transparent plastic bag for forensic analysis. The noise of the seal being closed was audible in the tense silence of the hall. "It will be sent for analysis immediately, Mr. Prescott," the official assured. The guests watched in absolute shock, a champagne glass being sealed as criminal evidence at a wedding party. It was like watching a police movie, but unfortunately it was my real life unfolding. Some guests were already filming the entire situation with their phones. What cruel irony! What should have been celebration became newspaper headlines. Kim finally tried to speak, but her voice came out trembling and desperate. "Dad, this is a terrible misunderstanding. I would never do something like this to you." Her words sounded empty and false to everyone present, especially in the face of so much concrete evidence. I looked directly into her eyes, seeing the daughter I raised transform into a criminal stranger. "Kim, I have all the necessary proof, the documents, the photos, the timeline, even the prepared drink," I replied firmly. She tried to approach me, but the officer intervened, maintaining safe distance. The tears in her eyes seemed genuine, but I knew they were tears of desperation for being caught, not remorse. Did she really think she could fool me so easily? Scott, in turn, began to sweat cold and tried to blame Kim for everything that had happened. "Officer, I didn't know anything about this. It was her idea. I was just trying to help with the financial aspects," he said, pointing to my daughter. His cowardice in throwing all the blame on his wife was disgusting, but not surprising. Kim looked at him with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Even among criminals there is betrayal. "Scott, you're lying. You planned everything. You said it was the only way for us to get the money," she shouted back. It was pathetic to see the two accusing each other in front of that entire audience. The guests watched the degrading spectacle as if it were a reality show. The wedding had transformed into a public session of accusations and betrayals. The guests' whispers cut through the tense air of the hall, with people commenting on what they were witnessing. Some filmed everything. Others made phone calls whispering about the scandal that was happening. It was obvious that this story would spread rapidly through Charleston, forever staining the reputation of those involved. "I never imagined I'd see something like this at a wedding party," I heard someone comment quietly. "How can a daughter do this to her own father?" another person asked. The indignation of those present was palpable, and I felt that public opinion was completely on my side. It was comforting to know that decent people can still recognize right from wrong. But have you ever imagined having to expose your own family publicly like this? The officer began to explain the criminal types involved in the situation, speaking clearly so everyone understood the gravity of the crimes. "We have here attempted fraud, document falsification, possible attempted poisoning, and abuse against an elderly person," he enumerated professionally. Each mentioned crime made the guests react with more indignation and shock. Kim and Scott listened to the list of accusations as if it were a death sentence, knowing their lives were ruined forever. "You have the right to remain silent and to a lawyer," the officer continued, beginning the arrest protocol. It was surreal to hear Miranda rights being read in the middle of a wedding party. The hall's elegance contrasted brutally with the raw reality of what was happening. I looked directly at my daughter in the final moments before the arrest and said the words she needed to hear. "Kim, I didn't drink, and I have all the proof." My voice was firm, without anger, just with the profound sadness of a betrayed father. She looked at me with desperation, knowing there was nothing more she could do or say to reverse the situation. It was the end of our family relationship, sealed publicly before dozens of witnesses. Scott lowered his head, defeated, knowing he had lost everything: his wife, freedom, reputation, future. The handcuffs appeared in the officer's hands, the metallic sound echoing through the hall in absolute silence. It was the final moment of the fall of two criminals who underestimated their victims' intelligence and luck. They were led from the center of the hall, under the gaze of all guests, walking among whispers, cell phone flashes, and expressions of shock. The echo of their footsteps being escorted by police marked the end of the party and the beginning of a new reality. Kim looked back one last time, and our eyes met briefly. It was a look of definitive farewell, not from daughter to father, but from criminal to victim. Scott didn't even have the courage to lift his head, walking with his head down between the officers. The guests opened the way, some still filming, others just observing in respectful silence. The headline was writing itself: "Daughter tries to poison elderly father during own wedding." When the hall doors closed behind them, I just smiled. Justice had finally been done. While I was giving my statement right there in the hall, answering the officers' questions about how I discovered the plan, a young woman approached discreetly. She was a professional-looking woman in an event hall uniform who had remained discreet during all the confusion. "Mr. Prescott, I was the one who sent the messages and made the call to alert you," she said with a soft but firm voice. It was Megan Ross, the staff coordinator who had risked her own job to save me from a devastating betrayal. I looked at her with immense gratitude, knowing that without her courage I would have lost everything I had built in decades of honest work. At that moment I realized that the person who really cared about me was a complete stranger, not my own daughter. Megan explained that she had heard the conversation between Kim and Scott through the security camera microphones during the party preparations. "Sir, I couldn't stay quiet seeing such injustice being planned against a decent person," she said with sincerity that cut through my heart. Throughout my whole life, I believed that blood was thicker than water, that biological family meant automatic loyalty. But there was a stranger showing more love and protection for me than my own daughter had ever shown. When I heard them talking about drugging you and forcing signatures, I knew I had to do something, even risking everything, she continued. It was the type of upright character I thought I'd only find in family, but discovered exists in people who choose to protect us. The painful truth I learned that night is that real family has nothing to do with DNA or surnames. It has to do with choices. Kim chose to betray me in the most cowardly way possible, planning to drug and rob me at a party that should have celebrated reconciliation. Megan, a complete stranger, chose to protect me, even risking her job and safety. "Mr. Prescott, family is who shows up when you need them most, not who shares your blood," she said, as if reading my thoughts. This breaking of family ties taught me that trust is built through actions, not kinship. How many people spend their whole lives trusting the wrong people simply because they're family? At that moment, Looking at that brave young woman who had saved me, I made two decisions that would change my life forever. First, I offered Megan a position of trust in managing my diners because I needed people with integrity working with me. Second, and more importantly, I decided to completely rewrite my definition of family. Megan, you showed more loyalty to me in one night than Kim did in her entire life, I said, feeling the emotional weight of those words. From today on, you're part of my real family, the one built by choice, character, and mutual protection. She accepted both proposals with tears in her eyes, understanding the depth of what was happening there. It was the birth of a new family, based on real values. Today, 3 years later, I can say that traumatic night was also one of the most important of my life. Megan works with me as general manager of the diners and has become the daughter I always wanted, loyal, upright, present in difficult times. Kim is serving time for fraud and attempted poisoning, and curiously, never tried to contact me to apologize or explain. This absence of remorse confirmed that I made the right choice in definitively cutting family ties with her. I learned that we don't owe forgiveness to those who betray us, but protection to those who save us. If you're going through something similar, remember, real family is who chooses to stay by your side when the world collapses, not who was born with your surname. Sometimes the greatest blessing is discovering who really cares about you. And now, I address you who followed my journey. Have you ever discovered that people close to you were plotting something against you while pretending concern? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to take drastic measures to protect what's yours when your own family turned against you. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. I share daily true experiences of people who went through betrayals by relatives and managed to react at the right time. Always keep in mind, you never lose the power to defend your dignity and your assets, no matter who tries to underestimate you.